name's Laurin Groover. I'm with the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society. A little bit about the Society. We're a 501c3 with the mission to secure a new home for the U.S. Army Signal Museum and to expand it to include the Army Cyber Corps and the other tenant units who've served so honorably at Fort Gordon. This fireside chat is being hosted today by the Society, and we are honored to have with us Colonel Sam Anderson. Colonel Anderson, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot, Lauren. I'm really excited to be part of this and excited about what the Society is doing to maintain the historical legacy of the Signal Corps in Fort Gordon.
Well, we're excited to have you here. A little background, Colonel Anderson currently serves as Executive Vice President at SoftTac Solutions. He served as Garrison Commander at Fort Gordon from 2012 to 2016 and as Chief of Staff to the Cyber Center of Excellence from 2016 to 2018. Now, as many of you will recall, this was that pivotal time in history when the Army made the outstanding decision to move Army Cyber to Fort Gordon. So it's been a very exciting few years, not only for Fort Gordon, but for the entire community. But Colonel Anderson, you actually spent a significant amount of your career in special operations assignments. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your military background?
Hey, thanks, Lauren. I entered the Army in 1990. I actually was a branch detail officer, so I did not join the Army as a signal officer. I came in as a field artilleryman, spent a couple years as a field artilleryman, then transitioned to the Signal Corps. And I had, kind of all I wanted to do in life was serve in a Ranger battalion. And so in 1995, I was fortunate enough to be selected to serve in the Ranger Regiment. It was the defining point in my career, even to this day. It was the most defining 2.5, 3 years of my life. And then subsequent to that, that assignment led to a series of other assignments in the special operations community. So pretty much continuously from 95 to 2012, when I went to the War College, I never left the special operations community and served in a variety of roles in a variety of units. And, it was really just fortunate to work with the greatest group of professionals that you could ever ask to serve with.
Well, I would imagine that many of our Society members would have a keen interest in Army communications specifically. But it's my understanding that the special operations community had a major impact on communications within the greater Army as a whole. Could you educate us on some of the major developments in special operations communications, and where are we seeing some of those developments today across the Army and within the Signal Corps and at Fort Gordon specifically?
Yeah, Lauren, I cannot overstate just how significant, decisive the special operations community was and is on innovation in the tactical space in the Army from a C5I perspective or C5ISR perspective. So many things that we look at as just, common practice today were all innovations done by the special operations community. The first tactical SATCOM radio ever built was built in DoD, was built by the special operations community for a very special mission, a unique mission that we now know as Desert One. It was the first SATCOM radio in DoD ever built. The first mass-produced tactical SATCOM radio designed by the special operations community. All the things that we see on the battlefield with very small aperture terminals, implemented initially by the special operations community, doing ISR distribution over network topologies, special operations community. All of the airborne communications capabilities in DoD, 100% of it was designed, researched, designed, and implemented by the special operations community. Radio over IP, IP-based networks in general, being able to provide different qualities of service based off the type of capabilities that the commander needed. Everything that the Army is doing today is predicated on special operations principles. But it even goes beyond technical capabilities, which are totally proliferated across the Army now. But it's even in the way that the special operations community trained and organized. The Army is now trying to develop expeditionary signal battalions that deploy small teams with small tactical communication suites, all that are principles from the special operations community. The Signal School is training what they call foundational training, so that every signal soldier in the Army gets a baseline of signal training. That is a cornerstone of being a special operations communicator. A jack of all trades is kind of their slogan. And even today, Army Futures Command and the network cross-functional teams led by, used to be General Gallagher, a former SOF communicator, now led by General Ray, a SOF communicator. Everything that they are doing, they are leveraging the expertise and the experiences and the past performances of the special operations community. So the impact of special operations communications on the Army is pervasive. It is complete and total. And I don't know if people really can appreciate that, but it was, it's awesome to see now how the Army is adopting these principles that, quite frankly, the special operations community perfected a decade ago or longer.
Well, this is fascinating. It's far more than I realized. Thank you for sharing that. Now, as I mentioned previously, you served as garrison commander at Fort Gordon at a time when the base was undergoing pretty substantial growth. I'm sure our viewers would be interested to learn more about what was happening on base when you began your assignment, and in what ways did the base grow during your tenure?
Yeah, so when I got here, it was pretty interesting time because the Army had not formally made the decision yet that the Army Cyber Command was going to relocate to Fort Gordon. There was still, some congressional friction on making that final determination, but we were all leaning forward in anticipation of that decision being made in Fort Gordon's favor. So obviously a lot of interest. And then really early on in my tenure as garrison commander, the announcement came out. And so then it was, the collective, okay, now what? And so we really had to kind of organize not only inside of Fort Gordon of how were we going to plan for that growth, but also in the community. How was the community, going to be able to absorb thousands of new residents, thousands of new K through 12 students, and also how was the community going to adapt to ensure that when this workforce came here, that they had the environment to be successful. So there was a lot of facility planning, city planning, local government engagement, and a lot of, I would call churn. And I know that you're going to ask about some of the challenges, but there were a lot because, quite frankly, Fort Gordon had a what I would call a branding problem, where we were looked at as this training and doctrine post, a post where people came to train. But in reality, between the NSA footprint, which was already large and growing, INSCOM had made decisions to put new organizations here on the ground. I mean, we were already in a growth mode that people didn't realize, and we were trying to convince the Army, quite frankly, that, hey, this is not a training post anymore, and you can't look at us in that way anymore, and you can't resource us like you would a traditional training post. So those were things that, as I first came on board, that we really had to start addressing.
Well, what were some of the major challenges that you witnessed as this all came about, and how did you and the other base leaders deal with those challenges?
So I would say that there were three principal challenges. The first challenge was kind of growth against the grain. Whereas if you think back about 2013, we were starting to, downsize the Army a little bit. We were starting to reduce the footprint on installations. There was even talk about mothballing facilities at various installations. So most of the Army was trying to figure out how to shut down, reduce their footprint, close barracks. And there was this really two posts in the Army, Fort Gordon and Fort Meade, and in Korea, which was a different problem set. But outside of those three installations, everybody was contracting. And so here we were trying to, state our case that no, we are growing. We need more facilities. and it was just kind of against the grain of everybody in this kind of reduction mode. So that was problem one. The problem two was a gross facility deficit. I mean, most of the facilities on Fort Gordon that housed the institutional arm were built in the 50s and 60s. Army Cyber Command obviously didn't have a footprint at all. So we had this massive facility deficit, everything from roads, gyms, gates, barracks, training facilities, top secret SCI facilities. I mean, we were completely ill-equipped to house this new force. So that was problem two. And then the challenge number three was, I would say, the community impact of making sure that not only the community was prepared from a demographic standpoint of how this growth was going to impact the region, particularly in the school systems, which was my principal concern from a community impact, was making sure that we didn't have a bunch of kids in trailers all over the K through 12 school system, but also how we were messaging to that workforce in the MDW area and the NCR to say, hey, Fort Gordon, Augusta, Georgia is a great place to be. You need to come here. You need to be excited about coming to Fort Gordon. This is an incredible place to live, work, and play. And how we, messaged that, was really a strategy that we had to undertake. So I would say that most of our challenges could have been put in those three buckets.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the construction, or having to have new construction on base. I know all the years that I was on Capitol Hill, military construction funding is the single hardest thing to get. And the fact that you guys were able to secure as much funding as you were to upgrade Fort Gordon is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I spent, a significant amount of my time as a garrison commander really preparing, General Fogarty with the right kind of metrics to support our argument. Really, General Fogarty was the decisive entity that pushed that initiative and compelled the Army to fund these facilities. And his principal argument was, we are trying to attract and retain a world-class cyber workforce that has a lot of options. And, it's going to be really difficult for me to retain that workforce and train that workforce in these dilapidated buildings. We have to make this investment. We have to establish the conditions now to, be able to make Fort Gordon a power projection platform in cyberspace. From a historical signal museum society perspective, I would submit that there needs to be a little corner in that museum for General Fogarty, because even though he's not a career signal officer, he probably has had a greater impact on the future of the Signal Corps than any general officer that's ever served in the Army. I mean, he was decisive. He embraced the Signal Corps, and he embraced the convergence of the signal and cyber disciplines. And he really was singularly responsible for, working both the congressional level, the Army level, and the local level to get those facilities done. And as the garrison commander, I was the guy that kind of was the city management planning component of that to really kind of support his initiatives. And so I do think that was a strategic accomplishment that occurred, during the time that I was there. I certainly was not the decisive entity, but that I think that will be a 50-year enduring capability that it could have just as easily not been funded.
Right, that's true. Now, you also served as Chief of Staff at the Cyber Center of Excellence. What was behind the ultimate decision to bring Army Cyber to Fort Gordon? And how did the Cyber Center of Excellence come into being? And if you don't mind, too, also letting folks know who might not know, what exactly is the Cyber Center of Excellence? What does that consist of?
Yeah, so first of all, the Cyber Center of Excellence, you really have to look at this at the Center of Excellence, at any Center of Excellence in the Army, but I'll focus on this one, like an institution, like a university. and so the College of the CCOE has different disciplines. There's the School of Cyber, the School of Signal. We also have the School of Electronic Warfare. And so if you look at them as almost different disciplines underneath one collegiate environment, the idea is that to bring all the components of cyber. And I know that if you ask 100 people what the definition of cyber is, you'll get 101 different answers. But from the definition from the Army perspective of cyber is, the installation, operation, maintenance, and the defend component of the network. Now, the installation, operation, and maintenance of the network, that's really the core competencies of the Signal Corps. It was before there was a CCOE, and it will be after the CCOE. I mean, it is still the largest component of cyber is the installation, operation, maintenance of Army DoD networks. Then you have the specific cyber, what we call the cyber workforce, the new component of cyber, where you have teams that actively defend DoD networks, whether they're probing inside our friendly networks, but doing the protect and defend portion that the Signal Corps, kind of provisions. And then obviously there is a very, very, very small component of the offensive capabilities of cyber that are tightly controlled and tightly managed, but it's the same workforce, it's just different authorities. So the CCOE encompasses all those schoolhouses, if you will. And so you asked the question of why did they make the decision to relocate here? And I think that there's a couple of decisions that the Army made that were really, ingenious. The first thing is that the NSA already has a huge, cryptologic platform here, and to relocate Army Cyber Command to be co-located with that cryptologic platform is a strategic force multiplier for the Department of Defense. And then the Army is the only branch of service that created a specific branch for the cyber workforce. We have a new branch, it's the 17 series branch that is dedicated to making cyber a career, a profession, whereas the other services, they didn't take that tact. I'm not saying that they were wrong and the Army was right, but they did not choose to make it a career path, whereas the Army did. And so by bringing Army Cyber Command here, and you already have the institutional side of the cyber workforce here, you've got the operational component and the institutional component at the same location. So as Army Cyber Command learns lessons, in cyberspace, in the operational domain of cyberspace, they can literally walk or drive a couple of miles right over to the cyber COE and teach those lessons in the classroom almost real time. The other thing that does is it allows for the exchange of instructors. Bring instructors that are teaching in the cyber school, put them on the operational platform, take folks that are on the operational platform, bring them onto the platform to teach. I mean, it allows that cycle of learning to be so rapid, real time. I can train somebody, I can teach him lessons that I learned last week on an operation, and then as soon as they're out of school, I can put them in the fight. And so that is really why the Army, made the decision to relocate here. You've got the cryptologic platform, you've got the schoolhouse, and then there are some just straight up logistics. It's a lot cheaper to build things in Georgia than it is in DC. It's a lot cheaper to get power in Georgia than it is in DC. So there were some long-term, just kind of straight up economics of this, but that was secondary to the operational advantages that it provided the Army and really DoD. by co-locating all those capabilities.
Well, you already touched on sort of the relationship between the Signal Corps and the Cyber Corps and how those missions complement one another. But how do you see this? How do you see these at that location developing the greater cyber workforce, not only at large but also specifically within the CSRA?
Yeah, so I think that one of the big challenges that we had as we started, all this started happening was, how do we attract the workforce to come here? And so that's almost like an economic development mission, making sure that the local community is conducive to the lifestyle that these kind of folks, want to lead. And then concurrently with that, how do we produce our own talent? How do we generate talent in the cyber workforce locally? Because somebody is much more likely that grew up in this region to stay here than it would be to convince somebody that grew up in DC to move here. And so, the K through 12 education process was really important to try to promote STEM, or I guess technically now STEAM. But one of the things that was done in the community with partnership with Fort Gordon was an organization called what's called ACE, the Alliance for Cybersecurity Education. And what they were able to do was to get an accredited cyber curriculum that was approved to be taught in the high schools, which then led to being able for students to take a cyber pathway in high school. And that really has generated tremendous amount of interest in the cyber workforce. And the Cyber Patriot program in this region is very active and very successful. And Fort Gordon looks at that as, an opportunity to kind of grow their own. And they're actively involved in promoting and supporting the Cyber, Patriot program. But while the K through 12 initiatives were going on, the cyber school itself had to, get curriculum approved. They had to go through their own, like any other university, getting their curriculum accredited by the governing agencies, not only Training and Doctrine Command to make sure that it met Army protocols, but also to make sure that it met, Cybercom's accreditation standards, so that when they graduated from the programs, that they were able to actually, operate on a DoD network. So there were two kind of accreditation efforts happening simultaneously, but all of that was designed to improve and professionalize the cyber workforce.
Well, as you and I discussed in the past, the growth at the base and the high level of skill and expertise that's going to be needed is probably the greatest opportunity that this region has ever seen to bring large segments of society out of poverty and get them trained and get them into this new world. And it sounds like the educational system in Augusta has really stepped up to try and, get the students ready to embark upon these potential career paths. But what challenges do you think remain, and what role can the community do to step in and help address those challenges?
Yeah, so I think that, the community, and I will say this, the community, every military town, the community talks about, we really support our military, we're behind them. But this community has taken active measures to actually solve problems. And so they have been engaged from the very beginning as partners in this, both at the local level, the state level. I'm physically sitting in the Georgia Cyber Center, which was funded 100% by the state of Georgia. And then at the national level, our elected officials, both past and current, have been decisive in, securing the resources for Fort Gordon growth. But I would contend that there's still more work to be done in the K through 12 environment. This workforce, as we are trying to attract people to live here, they have choices. They have choices on where to live, and a lot of people make choices, on the education, the K through 12 education system, on where they choose to live and raise their family. And so I believe that that K through 12, what your scores are, they are what they say they are, so everything that the community can do to improve the stature of their K through 12 education is going to be, decisive in attracting talent. I also think that this workforce, has, this generation of this workforce, 20s, 30s crowd, they have a certain way they want to live. They have a certain way they want to work, and they have a certain way they want to play. Revitalized downtowns, I think, are also a critical component of community development and economic planning to ensure that we attract the right kind of talent to this community. And then, the last thing I would say is that a regional approach to problem solving that does not look at county lines or even state lines when they make decisions about, problems that need to be solved. There's, I think this community's gotten a lot better about that, but I would, really encourage the community to continue to think regionally. And, that's where an organization like the Alliance for Fort Gordon is probably the singularly most strategic, focused organization in this community. They have the ability. They have the ability to look at things regionally. They have the ability to touch national level elected officials, state officials, local officials. They're involved in the K through 12 education, and they're non-biased. And so, I think that the Alliance for Fort Gordon has played a tremendous role in addressing, all these challenges that I have talked about.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out here to Tom Clark for all of his leadership in pulling that organization together and really making it a successful voice for the whole region. Well, Colonel Anderson, when you look back at your time on Fort Gordon, of what are you the most proud?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to as a garrison commander, to be assigned here at just kind of the right point in time. Like the point in time where you could actually make a strategic impact. I think all garrison commanders make an impact in their community, but the ability to make a strategic impact or be part of making a strategic impact. I was part of a great team that just happened to be in the position when the nation said, "Hey, we're gonna do this," and then to see the growth, to see the trajectory. And quite frankly, to see the plan that we put in place really in 14 and 15 actually coming to fruition, to see construction happening on Fort Gordon out in front of signal towers, to see the timeline associated with the new gate opening, to see the success of the Cyber Patriot Initiative. Those are things that, as a former Army officer, you can look back and say, hey, I had a small role in that. I wasn't, it probably all would have been equally, if not more successful without me, but I can at least say that I was there when all this happened. And, it's pretty neat to say that you were part of it. But then I'll go back to these facilities. These facilities that are going to be on Fort Gordon are going to be here. They're going to train soldiers for 50 years in these facilities. And it is the most critical component of that training mission. And to be able to support General Fogarty in securing the funds and the investment strategy for that, is probably something that, when I would say when I don't have any hair, but, I'm long since past that. But, when I'm sitting on the porch late in life, looking back on my career, I'll be able to, and I'll see kids that aren't even born yet that are coming through the CCOE, and say, I remember when we had to fight to get those facilities. I think that that'll be, something I'm really proud of my time at Fort Gordon. Obviously, kind of go back to where you started with this, with the special operations. I'm obviously really proud to have served in those environments and worked for some leaders that are, truly legends, and to see the Army adapting things that teams that I worked with, built and designed, that's pretty cool.
Well, given all the experience you mentioned with within Special Operations and at Fort Gordon, and as your role as having been such an important part of the greater Augusta community, what would you say gives you the most hope or optimism for the future? I'll ask you this final question to end on a happy note.
Well, I think that the hope is that optimism is that we're sitting on a national power projection platform that is going to be operating in cyberspace 24/7, 365, fighting in a contested environment that is at the highest level of our national security strategy. I mean, the threats from our adversaries in cyberspace is probably the single most important component of our national security strategy. And that platform sits here at Fort Gordon. So while there's going to be continued budgetary constraints, budget cuts, reductions in the force, maybe even, although, Congress doesn't have much appetite for another round of BRAC, I mean, there's going to be a lot of tightening of the belt. And we happen to be in a mission set that, is a growth industry. And so I think that is a lot of optimism for, Fort Gordon. I mean, you think back that the whole purpose of the Alliance for Fort Gordon was to defend this community from BRAC. And, and that was, less than 20 years ago. And fast forward to today, and I mean, this is an enduring 100-year platform that we're sitting on top of. And there's great optimism in that. But I would end with, where much is given, much is expected. So there's a lot to be expected out of the capability that Fort Gordon produces. And there's a lot of expectations of this region, the community, ability to support the needs of that workforce. So, the much is given, much is expected. We have been given a lot. And, it's, time to roll up our sleeves and continue to figure out how to make it better. And I would say that kind of close out that, back to the kind of Historical Museum Society, I think that this is another great initiative because, capturing the history of the Signal Corps is so critical because the Signal Corps is really, they've been given a new mission, a new, almost again, one of the most critical missions in our nation of, installing, operating, maintaining, DoD networks. And so being able to capture some of this history of how the Signal Corps got here, not only do I think will be great from an education perspective, but from a recruiting perspective. And also, hopefully, it will attract visitors to this area that will, again, help the economic growth of this region. So I'm really hopeful for your efforts in getting this museum put in place.
Well, Colonel Anderson, it has been a huge pleasure to talk to you today. We appreciate your taking the time, but we also thank you not only for your substantial service to the military and to our country, but also to your continued commitment to the community. You've been a tremendous force, and we're all grateful. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Laurin. Thanks for the opportunity for me to take part in this.